Over the last few years, South Africa has undoubtedly become stricter about what is acceptable and legal to post online. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa signed several new bills into law earlier in October. One of the new laws include an amendment to the Films and Publications Act, which makes the distribution of child pornography and revenge porn illegal. Now, even though this is very good news, it's still not solving headline problems. Ryan Smith is the founding member of Cause for Justice, a human rights and legal interest organization where he currently serves as the CEO and legal counselor. Now, Ryan, just to take a step back, what is pornography doing to our society and our collective culture today?
Yes, so I've actually written down a couple of things that come out of the research, and I'll recount them to you now. But I think just for starters, it must be acknowledged that pornography is a form of expression, right? So it's a form of media that's delivered to viewers and users, mostly in private, right? Because these days you can access anything on the internet via one device. It's a smart device, a phone or a tablet. Some people still use PCs these days, but so it's so easy to access the material, and any form of media has an influence on people's attitudes, on their thinking, and eventually on their behavior. And this is also the reality with pornography, is that it impacts the individual, but then it goes further, because this individual, having been impacted by the material, forming some kind of relationship compulsivity with the material over time, then gets impacted in their thinking, in their attitudes, in their behavior. And there is no person on this planet that is an island. So everybody engages with at least one other person. So what we see is that something that is extremely private in terms of how it is accessed has a public impact. The impact goes into relationships. It goes into, let's say, schools and into communities, and it affects the broader culture as people's thinking and attitudes and behavior starts getting reflected in the policies that are adopted by our lawmakers, by our government, and so on. So the influence is pervasive. I'll list just a couple of things that I put out. And one of the things is that pornography drives and creates an objectification of the human body, right? And objectification is most definitely a form of devaluation. There's a difference between viewing a human being as a person with a history, with relationships, with value, rather than viewing a human being as an object. And so what some of the studies have shown is they did these brain scan kind of studies on people. And when they showed them pornography, the brain has certain centers which light up and get engaged depending on what the brain is engaging with. So when the brain engages with a person, it's related to a certain part of the brain. When it engages with an object, another part of the brain becomes activated. And what they found through the studies is that when people view pornography, it's not the part of the brain that associates with persons, with relationships, that it's activated. It's the part of the brain that associates with objects, right? And I mean, you don't need to be a scientist to know that you would treat an object quite differently from treating a person. There's a vast difference in how you would treat a piece of trash as opposed to treating a human being, someone that you value as a person. So that's one of the pervasive influences. Some of the other things that are quite disturbing is that it leads to what is called a rape myth acceptance. So they've done studies with young men at college and university campuses in the United States, and found that as they view pornography, they start believing that women actually enjoy being raped. They actually believe that. So that's what is called rape myth acceptance. Also, it leads to what is called bystander passivity. So when they ask people, how would you respond if you see someone being sexually assaulted? But those people in the study who had been exposed to pornography, they were less likely to intervene, to actually intervene in the situation. And I mean, the reason why is they view whatever is happening there as being potentially consensual. Although there's an element of violence or aggression or something involved, their brains have been trained to view this as something that could fall within the scope of normative sexual interaction. And then also there's the sort of the outpost of that, which is it creates the intent to rape. So also the studies show that people, when asked if, or let's say pornography users in a study group having been asked, if you were to find yourself in a situation where you could rape a woman but no one would ever find out about it, it will just be a private thing and there would be no consequences, would you do it? Then those who had been using pornography said yes. You know, there's a greater likelihood to actually go ahead and do the act. Then I'd also like to mention that in the United States, 17 of the 50 states of the United States have already declared pornography to be a public health crisis within those states. And that is an acceptance by lawgivers on a very high scale. Remember, the USA is a federal system which each state has a lot of sovereignty. They basically run themselves like a country. On very few things does the federal government have a holdover and control over them. But there's an acknowledgement on quite a wide scale already that this is something that impacts on a public level. It's private use and access of something which has a public impact and influence which society itself cannot address and correct. So there needs to be some kind of intervention from outside forces. The last thing I'd mention is that it also drives the demand for paid sex, sex trafficking, and other forms of sexual exploitation. Just because people engage with the material, then they become desensitized, they get to a point where they have to use harder and harder material for the brain to experience the same kind of kick from, you know, what they are engaging with. And then in the end, this process of desensitization leads to some people actually seeking and acting out on a real life victim. They go seek out someone on whom they can perpetrate this. And in South Africa, we had a very, very sad practical example of this, where in 2004, there was a court case called State versus Engelbrecht. And the facts very shortly was that Mrs. Engelbrecht, her husband was a pornography user and he was a drunken alcoholic. She was asked by her husband to go out to an adult shop to go buy a specific DVD that, you know, he'd heard of and that he wanted to see. So she, for a long time, she declined, but eventually she gave in. She went past the shop, she bought the DVD, came home, the husband started watching it right there in the living room. 6-year-old daughter walks in, is exposed to what the father is doing and seeing. That in itself is really, really bad. It's influencing a family. But what followed on from that, late in the evening, the husband asked the wife to reenact what he'd seen on this DVD. Now, the kinds of things that you'd see in these days, these days you would call it just normal porn because it's the average thing you'd see. That is still quite extreme. Not many people, and especially women, would say, yes, I am, you know, I feel fine to engage in this kind of thing. But then so she was basically coerced into reenacting what the husband had seen on this DVD. And what then happened was the 6-year-old girl walked into the parents' bedroom and was then, you know, she had to see her parents do this. The reason why there was a court case is that the wife then later that night, she took a plastic bag, put it over the husband's head while he was passed out after a drunken stupor and killed him. And so this case is an example of how, you know, this material affects people, you know, right down to the very youngest and the most vulnerable in society.
Sure. Now, to continue with that, what are some of the harmful effects of pornography exposure on children and young people? You've touched on that, but if you can just in general, also just go a bit deeper.
Yeah, I think there are two main things I'd highlight. The one is it has to do with the developing brain. So the brain of a child and an adolescent, and they say even up to the age of 26, they talk about the plasticity of the brain, the ability of the brain to form new pathways, it's very helpful, to learn new things, to grow in your understanding of things. So that plasticity tapers off as you grow older, but especially among younger children and adolescents, the brain is very plastic, malleable in terms of forming new ideas, creating new pathways, new pleasure centers and rewards, basically, that it seeks out and responds to. And pornography, because it functions like a drug on the brain, is for that sole reason very, I would say, more dangerous for a child than for an adult. Not that it's not dangerous for the adult brain, but it's much more of a danger for the child brain or adolescent brain, because they are forming these ideas. And we talk about sexual scripts, which is being built over time. So children are exposed to these things, and they form these scripts about what does a normal, pleasurable sexual experience look like. And they get their scripts from pornography. But pornography is way beyond what is normative. It's not a normal way of having a sexual relationship. But this is what they are exposed to. So there's the cognitive development that is disrupted, and there's a huge impact on their choices and behavior going forward about their sexual choices and so on. And the scary thing is that pornography these days, or for many children, it's their default sexuality education. Because there are many homes where it's not touched on. Parents, for whatever reason, they don't go into proper education. What does it mean to have a healthy sexual relationship? What is good and partner respecting and honoring and so on? And they are then driven by pornography to accept these scripts. And these scripts, we know because of what is these days the default kind of pornography. They accept what is generally still accepted to be paraphilic disorders. It's abnormal ways of engaging in sexual relationship. I mean, where in the world would you get the idea from for a heterosexual couple to engage in anal sex? That does not make sense. There's no reason whatsoever for that even to happen, but it is a narrative, and it is a kind of genre that is pushed by the pornography industry. You get these reports every now and again how young girls, adolescent girls, say, but they feel pressured. The guy just wants to have anal sex with me, that kind of thing. And it can only come from one place, because it's not the kind of thing that parents are pushing to children. And I would say, that leads into coercion, leads into abuse, and degradation, and violence in the end. So that is the scary thing, that children, once these pathways have been formed within their brains, these scripts have been acquired, it's very difficult for them to unlearn that, because that is what they've known, and that is what their brains have been accustomed to and to respond to. It is a big problem.
Yeah. Now, what has cause for justice, done in the past in terms of the legalization of pornography on media platforms? I know you guys have been going on for quite some years. Where are things standing at this point?
Yeah. So maybe just to start off with where things currently stand is that President Ramaphosa has recently, on 19 September, signed an amendment act into legislation that amends the Films and Publications Act. And one of the things that was proposed by government in this legislation was to watered down South Africa's definition of what is disallowed or prohibited sexually explicit material. So we've got separate definitions. We've got a definition of what kind of material that is sexual in nature may not be distributed in South Africa at all. Then you've got another category which is called let's call it the vanilla explicit sexual conduct. That's your hardcore pornography, but it does not contain certain elements that makes it prohibited. And so they wanted to water down the definition of what would be prohibited. And we opposed that. We said, no, but this can't be right. Why would we increase the let's say the pool of material out there that may be distributed, even to adult audiences, right? Why would we do that? And so we fought a fight of about 3.5 years. For the first 2.5, we saw absolutely no success at all. But in the last, I'd say, year, everything, and I want to use the word miraculously, turned around, because it was a 180-degree turnaround by Parliament. There were several stages through which this engagement went, but in the end, they accepted that they should not follow this route. So that was a very positive thing that happened. Aside from that, the new legislation also, in principle, but subject to very strong conditions, legalizes all online pornography in South Africa. One of the major conditions to this being legal is that the producer or distributor of the material must be able to show that it is not possible for a child to access the material. So although they're taking what up to now has been the adult world model, up to now you could only legally access pornography within a building that is licensed as an adult premises. That regime has now basically been transposed onto the online space. So although that is somewhat of a negative or a retrogressive step, the fact that they do put in place mechanisms which will protect children, in that if you want to distribute pornography in South Africa, we're talking about adult pornography, you must be able to show that a child can't access your material. That is quite a high hurdle they've placed there. And whether it will be possible for porn distributors to actually get over that hurdle, I'm not sure, because we live in a tech savvy world. Children are very savvy these days about how to get around all kinds of barriers and so on. So whether they'd be able to protect children remains to be seen. But at least that protection has now been built into the legislation. To come back to where we came from, is that our very first court case we did was against a specific broadcaster in South Africa called Top TV. They later had a name change to Star Sat, who wanted to air 3 dedicated pornography channels as part of their suite of products. ICASA, our broadcasting authority, gave them permission, and then ourselves and 2 other organizations took that decision of the broadcasting authority to court for a judge to review the legality of that decision. And then we were successful in both the High Court and again also in the Supreme Court of Appeal to overturn that decision. So that up to now it's not possible for pornography, adult pornography, to be distributed by way of subscription broadcasting services.
Sure. Yeah. Now, how can the broader public get involved with Cause for Justice and raise their voices on this specific issue?
Yeah. So the main thing really is for people to become clued up. If you don't know what is going on, that will you will have no tools, no basis, no knowledge from where to actually do something about it. So we will encourage all parents, especially parents obviously, and others in society who have an interest in protecting children, to go and look at the research, because it's out there, it's available. What does this material do? And then beyond that, to go further, then you need, if you're a parent and you've got a child at school, you've got to go to your school's management team, to the governing body, and explain to them this is the realities. And some people obviously have an engagement or a relationship with government and other parts of the state to also get the message out there. And what we need, especially in South Africa, is proper research on this subject. There's a lot of research that has been done overseas, but in South Africa, the research base is very lacking. So we need to actually reproduce those studies showing the harmful impact in South Africa. And I'll just also mention that our organization, beyond the legal engagement and on the policy level, we also go to schools and communities and deliver what we call a parent talk. And it's titled The Unspoken Epidemic of Children and Pornography. It's sort of like a parent awareness training event where we want to give parents the tools to at least go and upskill themselves, become equipped, become empowered to act on their children's behalf on this issue.
Now, we want to encourage you to please leave a comment or a question if you have any in terms of the focus that we just spoke on. Now, Cause for Justice proactively seeks to identify and take on causes in line with the organization's core values, and they are human dignity, responsible freedom, accountable governance, family and social justice. And if you do want to know more about the current cases they are involved in, please visit their website at www.causeforjustice.org.